Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. Today we're speaking with Andrew Gold. He's a journalist and filmmaker. He's the man behind the documentary Exorcism, The Battle for Young Minds. We have an interesting conversation surrounding modern-day exorcisms, whether or not the priests behind them can be trusted, the psychology behind them, and more. You can find him on Twitter at AndrewGold_OK. He hosts his own podcast as well, titled On the Edge with Andrew Gold. The links to his podcast, Twitter, YouTube channel, and documentary will be in the description of the video below. It was a lot of fun to speak with him. We actually spoke for hours after the podcast ended. He has genuinely great insight into a variety of different topics. I highly recommend you giving him a look-see, and please welcome Andrew Gold.
Shut up and sit down.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. As always, I'm your host, Vincent Freeman, joined by my good friend Bruce, my co-host. Bruce, once more, thank you for joining me on this journey.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
And today we have a special guest. We have our very first filmmaker and journalist on the podcast. It's going to be interesting. He's the host of his own podcast called On the Edge with Andrew Gold. His documentaries include Exorcism, The Battle for Young Minds, a conversation that we're going to be having on it. So, Mr. Gold, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. So, and we're going to get into your fascinating documentary Exorcisms. I think is an incredibly interesting cultural phenomenon, to say the least. But I'm interested in a bit of your background as a filmmaker and a journalist. What sort of led you down the path of sort of focusing on documentaries, and what particular topics interest you as a journalist?
Do you guys know of Louis Theroux?
Yes.
Right.
Oh,
so
yes.
He's not as big in America, I don't think, but he's like a god in England. And his father is Paul Theroux, or Paul Theroux, I think they say in America. He's an American travel writer, but his son Louis is documentary maker in England. And so he sort of really, I guess it's Michael Moore. He started with Michael Moore. It's those kinds of documentaries, but less political. And he goes, and I grew up watching him as a presenter, going and meeting like the strangest, weirdest people, but he was always just so sort of cool and calm and collected. He hung out with Nazis and alien hunters and all these kinds of things. So I started as a journalist more than a filmmaker. And yeah, I guess I also had this passion for languages, and I started moving around the world, and I thought, I want to document some of this stuff. And I thought, but I don't want to document like I'm a traveler. A lot of people are like, this is my gap year, or we call it a gap year, like a year abroad. Look, I'm traveling or whatever. That's boring. And so I thought, what can I do? So yeah, I found out about like all sorts of weird stories. And initially I thought, I'm a journalist, not a filmmaker. I'm going to start writing about that kind of thing. And then a friend of mine, he was working with a production company in Argentina. That's where I was living at the time. And he had some contacts at Fusion, TV channel called Fusion in the States. And they were looking for stuff. So I sort of put myself forward. I said, I could do this. Why not? So initially I was just the presenter. I wouldn't have called myself a filmmaker in those stages. And I made sort of 5-10 minute videos about UFOs or infidelity and like weird stuff that I thought, this is cool and interesting and different. And it was great. Like they took the videos, Fusion, they bought them and stuff, and that was great. And I thought, wow, this is going to be easy. As it turned out, it was impossibly difficult, and I'd gotten very lucky early on. And then I found out about this Exorcist guy, and no one was taking it. I mean, I was trying with the BBC and everyone. They're not really that interested. And I think it's the same with most channels in most countries. They're not that interested in stuff outside of their own territory. They would have preferred like an Exorcist in England or whatever. But my USP was like, I speak these languages and stuff. So I wanted to do that. So I got a friend to come out who's a director and filmmaker. And I learned how to edit and do all the filming process. And we just, like the two of us, went and met this, hung out with this Exorcist guy for a month or so. And we just figured it out as we were going. and we thought we can do this, but it was just a hell of a lot of work. And then we spent about 2 years trying to sell that to the BBC, and eventually someone from the BBC watched it, and then the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. What's great is that we were talking before we started recording. You speak many different languages. You lived in different places, so this is basically you have just front row access to a bunch of different cultures and different cultural phenomenons. So a lot of topics can really come under your purview. Is there anything aside from the whole exorcism topic that you're interested in also making potentially a future documentary about, or at the very least exploring the potential?
Yeah. I think like it's something that I think you guys will want to talk about as well, which is just I don't know. I'm fascinated in different cultures, people who are as different from me as possible. That's the whole point, I guess. The whole point of being a traveler or an adventurer or a filmmaker is to do that, and that's not happening at the moment in British like presenter led, which is what we call them when you've got a presenter leading the documentary, like what I do. They mostly want people who are like doing their own story. So it would be, for example, my family's Jewish, so they might want me to do like, hey, I'm going to hang out with the Hasidic Jews or something, which just doesn't interest me at all. So for me, it is just like whatever's the most controversial, different. I just want to step into these people's lives. So the last couple of years, I've actually been writing a book about pedophiles.
No kidding.
Yeah, in Germany. So I'm based in Berlin now. And it's been a crazy couple of years hanging around with like non-offending. That's what I say. I'm not really that interested in the offenders. They're more like psychopaths, and nobody really wants. I mean, I don't know, but all these people who say they're not offenders and all that. I wanted to make a documentary, and nobody would appear on camera. So I thought by that point I had all these contacts, and I thought I'm going to write a book about like. What these people are like. So it could be pedophiles, it could be exorcism. I made a film about abortion recently. So just anything that's like controversial and different and crazy.
Wow, you're really going into the deep waters with these sorts of topics. That is absolutely... Here in the United States, there's a documentary that just came out on Netflix. It's a French not a documentary, sorry. A French film called Cuties. Oh, yeah. And it's really sparking this controversial debate. It's crazy. And it's one of those... I'm perfectly fine with watching movies that have like rape and just brutal deaths. I'd probably even be comfortable watching snuff films, but I could barely finish Cuties because it was just so like that's just one of the things that I guess I won't trespass on. It's just so uncomfortable. Was it that bad then? Because I heard it might just be a marketing thing, like because the French marketing was different to the American marketing. I haven't seen the film, so was the film quite sort of exploitative of young girls? Yeah, there's 2 scenes in particular. I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 dancing scenes where they actually get pretty heavy with stuff. But like in the final dancing scene, close-up shots of their behinds, and you can
It's interesting how like you do a lot of film work into looking into controversies or whatnot, and like because of the new social environment we're all in, my concern is that these films, like Cuties, as you were saying, Vincent, how, as disturbing as they are, they, in general, bring up controversies that should make people think. But because of their quote unquote offensive content, and which is not to say they're not offensive, they have the potential of being canceled because of the new cancel culture outrage that we have, and therefore we lose an important avenue for which to make people, to stimulate or shock people into thinking, hey, what's up with this? And it seems to be a movement that's really antithetical to our intellectual life, which is important if we want to move forward morally as a people.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's something we're definitely going to touch on towards the end here. But going back onto your documentary about exorcisms, so this is without a doubt a fascinating topic, right? So this idea, we've been sold this sort of meme that exorcisms are this phenomenon. If you watch like The Exorcist or The Exorcism of Emily Rose, or The Devil Inside, it's this like crazy thing where they're levitating, jumping all over the walls, popping their bones out of their sockets. But then when you watch the actual footage of real life exorcisms being performed, it's nowhere near as theatric, but it's still pretty intense. I mean, especially if you're there, I can't imagine how intense it was. So how How was that for you? Because you're a pretty secular person from what I gathered, a non-believer, I suppose. So what was the atmosphere like for you being in such a hyper-religious environment where people are under the impression that they're literally getting either Satan or demons being ripped out of their bodies?
Yeah, I would say until I started hanging around with these pedophiles for this book, I would say that was probably the most shocking part of my life. I'd say was watching the first exorcism, and not even the first one actually, because the first one we did was this, I can't even remember how it is in the film now, but we did one with an older woman who was maybe in her 30s called Natalia, and then there was a young girl who as you know, we follow in the film called Candela, and she's 17 and she's so vulnerable and stuff. And yeah, that was probably the most uncomfortable, because in the film we only show 3 or 4 minutes of that because you've got to speed it all up. But we were there for an hour and a half. It just did not stop. The screaming and screaming, and yeah, being secular, that was just, I'm watching a young girl have a mental breakdown in front of me, and being not, I'm not a doctor or anything, so I'm not used to seeing people in such vulnerable situations. And yeah, I was not only was I watching that, I was watching it fully aware, like, this isn't going to help her long term, in my opinion. And you're just sort of thinking, you're a bunch of, can you swear in this podcast?
Yeah, go for it.
Bunch of fucking nutters, all of you. The thing was, we went in, and my friend David, who was the guy who filmed it, so it's just the two of us, really. Sometimes we had a couple of like interns who were like, younger guys who came in, did like the sound, held the microphone or whatever. But it was most days it was just me and this guy David Hayes. He's brilliant. But he grew up with a much more religious upbringing. He was like, some sort of Christian family. I don't really know. And he had to sort of temper me at times, and sort of, because the whole idea is going into these different places and just being open. And that was a really tough thing for me, because it's like, I'm literally, there's just no way I'm going to be open to the idea that this exorcist has magical powers. There's just no way, that nothing could possibly happen. And he had to sort of say, yeah, but you've got to sort of go into this as if you did, not as if you think that, but as if you were open. Because that's the whole point of you being there. So I tried to sort of just, but yeah, no, long answer short. It was a pretty shocking, moment for me.
That's the interesting paradox with these sorts of things, because when you're filming a documentary and you're presenting this thing that's occurring, the sort of common sense knowledge is that, well, you got to be fair and balanced, right? You got to not be so antagonistic towards the idea that it could be true, while at the same time being very skeptical about it. But then, outside of the context of filmmaking, in reality, it's like, well, it's overwhelmingly unlikely that this is actually the case. So the only honest way to go about the situation is to be as skeptical as possible, because of how incredible this claim is, right? It's as the saying goes, I forget how it goes, but it's like, incredible claims require incredible evidence. And so, but like, in the context of a documentary, that's not the way that you should go about the situation, or at the very least, that's not the way people expect you to go about the situation.
I suppose it depends on the style, because like Michael Moore, he's very biased in one way, for example. So that's just his style. He's very left wing and that's his thing, and I respect that. That's cool as well. But then I grew up on Louis Theroux, and it was always just like, he'd meet Nazis and these horrible people, and he just would just be like, and he would judge. You do sort of nudge the viewer in one direction or another, but there's no such thing as real exorcism.
Right. And what was interesting is that there were so many red flags that came up to that showed to me when it came to the legitimacy of what the Pope guy the father was doing, right? Because when it comes to like Catholic exorcisms, I don't deny that they're being sincere, because a lot of them they're not doing them for profit. They're doing it out of genuine religious reasons. So I don't doubt the sincerity that they're under the impression that they're casting out demons. But what really took me by surprise, because this priest, I think, was like Lutheran, right? He wasn't Catholic. And so, one, generally speaking, in exorcisms, they don't let you film. So Catholics will never let you film an actual exorcism, but this was very hands-on. You actually even took part in the exorcism itself, which was, to me, was interesting. Were there any red flags that made you feel like this priest isn't legitimate? He's not, whether we're talking about the fact that he gained some monetary value from this, even though he claimed that at the end of the day his profits were zero. And any red flags that came into your purview?
I think it's well, firstly, I've got to be a little bit, not very, because he's never going to listen to this, but I've got to be a little bit careful about what I say, because I mean that's I forgot the word now. What's the word when you someone?
Slander, libel.
Yeah, libel. Slander, because I'm speaking. That's it. So that's yeah, I mean, it's literally his way of earning money. It's his workplace, and I'm saying that he's fake, you know. So if I'm saying that, we had a huge issue when I first got it to the BBC. They needed us to get it like properly lawyered up. Like we had to like get lawyers looking through every last detail and changing bits and pieces. So like the final shot of the film, for example, we got this, and I don't think it's giving away too much, but we got a little shot of this. Maybe it is giving away a bit, but like the padre, the father, with some girl on it. It's a photo or whatever, and you know he's in a different country, and obviously he's like eloped with her somewhere or gone on holiday with her, which he shouldn't be doing. And they said to us, the lawyers, like, we need to sort of make out like we're analyzing from an artistic point of view the photo, rather than that we're like just showing what's happening. So we had to be like, oh, look at how the sun touches her eyes and, you know, shimmers in the light, and that kind of thing. So we had to be really careful, because, you know, if anyone's going to pursue anything, it's him, because he really is quite determined with the way he works. But yeah, the red flags for me, I mean, look, the red flags were just that he claims he can do paranormal things. If anybody could do anything paranormal ever, it would be the biggest news story ever in the world. It would be the front page of every newspaper. Somebody did something paranormal. It would be insane. So that was the first red flag. But then the movie aspect of it, the showiness, I mean, he'd superimposed himself onto movie posters and, you know, his face instead of the Exorcist from the movie, and all sorts of weird stuff like that. It was so showy that I thought, like, he's not, you know, because I suppose the question is, does he believe that, you know, is he mental, totally mental, and he thinks he can do all of this stuff, or is he a shaman? Is he shaman's not the right word either, is it? But is he a fraud knowingly? So that's the question, and I to this day I don't know. That's again, sorry, I'm quite long answers, aren't they?
No, they're great. The longer, the better, actually, because it really gives us a window into your mind, what you're thinking. You know, that's the main point of this whole thing. And so this was like my first time, because I went deep into the rabbit hole of exorcisms after I saw your documentary. And one of the patterns that I noticed, and this pattern was demonstrated in your documentary, was that these people, they didn't seem like insane people. They were just, you know, the people who were getting demons cast out of them. They were just normal people. You know, I expected these people to be like catatonic or something, but they just seemed like they had an obvious medical problem, a psychological problem that needed addressing. But then they turn hysterical during the exorcism. So they go from like 2 to 9 or 10. Like they start laughing during the exorcism. They start, you know, actually speaking as if it's the devil speaking. And so do you think that there's something about the exorcism itself, you know, combined with the hyper-religious state that these people are in, to act out the exorcism? Like, what do you think is happening there? You know, you said that you're not a medical professional, but you know, from your perspective, what do you think is like going on? It's so strange seeing.
I thought about it a lot, actually, because it bothered me. And, you know, yeah, when she's talking like she's the devil, Candela was doing that for a while, and suddenly she has this low voice, and she's like, leave her alone, or something. And it was like, fuck me, that, you know, gives me shivers just thinking about that. I think so. Again, the thing is with the documentary, it was only a few minutes, but like the second time when it was Candela, there was like a good 20 minutes or so when nothing happened. So we didn't show that in the documentary because that obviously looks quite boring, nothing happening. I originally wanted to. Our original edit, I mean, I edited it with my friend David. We learned to sort of edit, you know, he could edit already, but I had to learn to do that. So it was done, but not at a professional level before it got taken on by Villager Films at the end. They're a good production company, and they gave it like a glossier edit. So in my initial edit, I had like, you know, nothing happening for a while, and us sort of exchanging looks like, oh God, this isn't going to work, because that's how we felt. And then, you know, 20 minutes later, another 10 minutes later, and so on. And then she went to like, seemingly out of nowhere, but actually after 30 or 40 minutes, she went to a 9 or 10. I think what's happened is they know how they're supposed to react. They've seen the movies. And like, I mean, the mind's really powerful. I'm sure you've read loads of books or articles and stuff about like placebo effects and the way the mind can heal itself. And that was something I learned shooting that, was that exorcisms do work. And that was the craziest thing I learned from the whole thing, is they do work. She felt better. A lot of people do feel better because it is this placebo effect, and it is this great feeling it's a release. I mean, can you imagine a greater release than that? For an hour just screaming, and then being told by somebody who you respect and look up to that you're cured now. In those communities, these are quite impoverished communities who don't have the same kinds of education. I mean, as soon as you go into the suburbs of Buenos Aires, outside the city center and stuff, it's really quite poor out there, and the education isn't great there. So those priests are like their teachers almost. And if a teacher or a doctor tells you, or like just someone tells you you're fixed, you're better, and you've been screaming, you got it all out, you will feel better. And yeah, I went back and saw her a year later, and she was back to square one. That's the thing. I mean, it works, but temporarily. So that's what's going on. I think they really believe in it. They're recreating it, but they're telling themselves that's not what's happening. And I imagine you guys probably, even if you're not from impoverished communities, you probably know some people who believe in like tarot cards and astrology.
Well, Andrew, that's actually a line of thought that I want to follow up with you on at the moment. Like I'm a practicing martial artist, and there's aspects that I saw in the film that I see reflected in the martial arts community, which can be in its own way just as cultish. I've heard about behavior like this before, in which you see not only the performer, in this case the padre, but you see the audience fooling themselves into delusion. And there's a video going around there on the internet. I can share it with you later, in which we see this martial arts quote unquote master demonstrating his use of his chi, his life energy, or whatever. And he has several students. He has his own school, and he's just waving his hands around like you see some Jedi in the Star Wars movies. And the students look like they're getting hit. They fall down, what have you. They get knocked over without being touched. Now, looking at it from the outside, we know that looks like nonsense, but the students are willingly taking the fall, even though they can't possibly be anything affecting them. So we can argue that they deluded themselves into going along with it. Now, speaking to your point now about the Padres' patients falling back under the symptoms after their exorcism, when they had finished it, they seemed to be convinced of their own cure at the time. But looking back at their behavior when they're actually part of the exorcism itself, I see a kind of parallel between their behaviors and these martial arts students getting hit by this quote unquote chi. We see two different groups of people in two different situations, more or less having fooled themselves into something. Now, do you think those behaviors are really analogous?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, have you guys seen Derren Brown's Miracle on Netflix?
No.
So Derren, do you know who he is, Derren Brown?
Yes.
I'm not familiar.
He's like bald and a magician. he calls himself a mentalist more than a magician, and he's British, so he's like the top guy in Britain for that. He's like a national treasure, so to speak, and he's amazing at what he does. But he always says from the start, like, I just want everybody to know I obviously don't have any magical powers, none of that. And he'll tell an audience that and you can see this. It's called Miracle on Netflix, and he actually tells them. He says, "Look, I have no powers. I'm not channeling God, anything like that, and I'm still going to make you react the way that an exorcist or a priest of that kind would do." And they're sort of laughing in the audience. And then he does. And he gets them all falling on the floor. He gets people to come up and he goes, you're falling. Or he starts shouting at them in different ways. And then he gets people to come up who say like a woman says she's blind or something. And he comes up and he cures her blindness. He gets somebody else to come up and cures their the bad back and whatever. And I think it's partly his use of hypnotics. And I think he says he doesn't even entirely understand how it works. And it's partly just the mind's willingness, especially when there's an audience sort of willing you on. There's a social pressure to say that you've been fixed, or a social pressure to fall down when you're supposed to fall down. Or in the martial arts analogy, it's the same pressure. You're supposed to fall. And probably a lot of people, if you ask them afterwards, some people would say they had no choice but to fall, and some people would probably say, well, I didn't really want to, but I went along with it because everyone else was doing it, you know?
Well, going back to that same example with the martial arts master and his students, we see circumstances in which we have like cult leaders fooling the people who follow them. But like there are a lot of instances in which the cult leader is part of the cult himself and has deluded himself into believing that he actually has these special abilities or powers. Now, going back to the chi master and his students, um, you see the same master issue a challenge out there to the mixed martial arts community. And like the same in the same video, this real life MMA fighter who nobody knows of, they get in the middle of the ring, and within a few seconds, he's just punching this old man in the face, and beating him up. And but there's a few seconds in that clip where the guy actually rubs his face, and you actually see on his face, oh my God, I got hit. He actually believed that he had these powers. The master was really a believer. So we can say that this school of martial arts was pretty much a self-contained cult with people trapped in their own belief systems. Now, the Padre, at the end of the film, um, it looked like he was really someone who was a manipulator, not someone who is truly acting in good faith according to his own delusions. Now, do you think that what was he an individual who was demonstrating a belief in his own hype? It doesn't seem to be that way.
So I think it's impossible to know, isn't it? I guess my mum, her best friend, does a lot of this stuff, right? And she's like the loveliest woman. You know, you go over to her house and she's like making you food, and she's like giving you advice, and she's just so sweet and lovely. And she has an industry where people come over and pay her to talk to their dead relatives and stuff like that. And I don't want to speak about that too much about that personal case because obviously she's very close with my mum, and but I have no doubt that she believes that she's doing it, which is crazy to me. But yeah, I don't. She just wouldn't. She doesn't need to. She doesn't need money or anything like that. I don't think so. She's doing it because she believes it. The Exorcist is the Padre in this case. I mean, he's from a very poor area. He's now able to go on these like lavish holidays with young women who all follow him around. He at least has more of a motive to be doing that. I wonder if it starts. I wonder if he. I thought he was a fake and a phony, and with time I've started to really understand how people can really trick themselves into believing stuff. Obviously, I spoke about. I'm writing this book about pedophilia at the moment. Can't remember if that was when we were recording or not. But I've met some of these guys they've really tricked themselves into believing that it's acceptable or okay, and that's like, wow, the human mind is incredible. So maybe he has convinced himself of that, and then he sort of embellishes it with all these like movie posters of himself and all this stuff. And he plays the Exorcist theme tune during his mass, the tubular bells, and you just think, well, he can't be taking himself seriously. He was annoyed at me. He made some comment off camera that we caught when he talked about the Falklands War. And he was like, don't trust the English, there's the Falklands, they took the Falklands from us, and that kind of thing. And you would think if he really believed he was like a messenger of God, like how could he possibly care about a couple of islands or whatever, So yeah, I'm undecided about his motives.
Sure. I wanted to get your take on how cults and religions intersect. Like, have you ever heard of a man by the name of Stephen Hassan? Okay, so Stephen Hassan is known to be this individual who's documented specific means by which cults indoctrinate and manipulate its members, and he has this kind of model that he calls the bite model, in which cult leaders control the behavior, information, thought, and emotional control of their followers to get them to buy into their system or whatever it is. Now, given that the Padre taught out of a religious structure, Lutheranism, the ingredients, I think there's a lot of crossover between a religion and a cult, and in a lot of circumstances, I think they're the same. But I I'm not sure what the clear hard line of delineation is, but going back to the Padre, given that he had a religious structure, he had all the ingredients he needed for the creation of a religious cult. But do you think there's much of a difference between fundamentalist religions and cults themselves? And as an add-on to that question, like, what do you think about like very, very liberalized religions that are arguably, well, because of the liberalized nature, their beliefs are much more in line with the modern world. But it's still cultish to a degree in which like some of their beliefs are delusional.
I'm very quite anti-religion actually. For somebody, I pride myself on, even though my podcast is called On the Edge, I pride myself as being very, and I guess you guys might do as well. I try to be on every issue very in the middle and very sort of, okay, well, I get, and that's what a journalist has got to do. Like, okay, I get that and I get that. I think one of the places I feel really strongly one way or the other is with religion, because it just doesn't work for me. I just, as a journalist, again, I want the truth. I want to get to the truth. And I just feel like in some, your first part of the question was about, the different sort of cult and religion. And the only thing I can think about is cults often have one person who's benefiting probably financially at the top, and a religion you can debate about that. And I suppose, obviously Christianity, there was a huge history of benefiting financially, a lot of people, and it was a big thing. But in general, across the world, well, I don't know. Yeah, they're getting a lot of money as well. I don't really know, but I think cults are very similar to religion. But yeah, I am very anti-religion. It drives me mad, and I actually get sometimes more frustrated when people say, "Oh, but you shouldn't take the Bible or the Quran or the Torah literally. It's just a metaphor." And I just think, well, let's stone the gays to death. What is that a metaphor for? And I just think if you're going to believe the other stuff, I almost have more respect for somebody who just follows the whole thing. Like that's just my opinion. I just feel like if you're going to take some of it, take all of it if you're going to be religious. Otherwise, let's live in the real world. Let's stop pretending, we all know that stuff didn't happen. So that's how I feel. But I also don't want to marginalize people who do have those beliefs, because it gives some people comfort, especially if they're coming towards the end of their life. I think a lot of people don't really believe in it anyway, because if someone's about to die, even when they're very religious, you rarely hear of them being just totally calm and like, okay, well, I'm going to a better place now. Yeah, I think deep down, people don't really believe that stuff.
Yeah, you're in good company here on this podcast when it comes to.
I was worried as I was talking.
Yeah, no worries.
You're an excellent company.
Yeah, you're an excellent company here. And it's fun, and I agree with you completely. It frustrates me when people have really, basically like free flow, like what they call them, like the cafeteria, religious people, where they only take the parts of the Bible or the particular text that they like, and everything else is a metaphor. Because I think from an academic standpoint, we basically have a text that informs us of the philosophies of the people who wrote them at the time, whether we're talking about, pre-parochial Palestine, or what have you. Like, this is a fascinating window into what they thought, but we're wasting our time trying to distort these texts in a way that comport with our current moral views. And I think that's a shame. But, on the topic of exorcisms, and you mentioned the fact that this seems to be the Padre was basically working on the fact that he was living in an impoverished place in Argentina, and then he was using the money that he was gaining potentially to, live a lavish life. And what I found that was interesting was that you really only see, this could be a wild assumption, but because I couldn't find enough evidence to back this up, but it seems to me like the main places where these exorcisms are occurring are in these poor, underdeveloped countries. You very rarely see these things occur in like Norway, Sweden, Denmark. It's usually like Italy, Argentina, and I think the country with the most amount of exorcisms was actually Mexico. And so it's like there's a GDP threshold that demons aren't allowed to cross. So, and were you? And I wanted to ask you this question, but then towards the end of the documentary, it became obvious that this was the case, that there were people who returned to the Father after the exorcism, claiming that the problems persisted. So it's like the placebo effect works for a bit, and then it doesn't. And at the same time, you can sort of understand it, because one of the people that you were talking with, they said like, well, the psychologist recommended that they were basically hospitalized for, were placed in a mental institution for quite some time. And I sympathize with that. Like, they don't want to do that. So sort of desperation, last minute resort, they go over to this, this long shot. And so, that's just sort of an analysis that I've made. I don't know what you think of that. Is there a connection between the fact that these countries are underdeveloped and hyper religious, and this increases the likelihood that people are going to go to these exorcisms, where you don't see that in secular countries? They just go straight to, to medical professionals. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I've thought that for a long time about ghosts. All the ghosts seem to have been from like medieval England or like Renaissance England, aren't they? They're all sort of 18th century ghosts from like a dungeon or something. They're very rarely ghosts from like, the coast of Spain, like on the beach.
You never get like a 20-year-old hipster ghost, huh?
No, they're all just like Victorian, like all dressed nicely, like Harry Potter kind of ghosts. You don't get prehistoric ghosts like cavemen who are ghosts. So, yeah, it's just the myths and the stories we tell ourselves. Again, like, I come from a Jewish family. They weren't very religious compared to like most people, but we did all that stuff. I had a bar mitzvah. I can read Hebrew, which is a great advantage. I can't speak it for, I don't know what any of it means, but I can actually read the words. So that's great. That's cool. But like, I look back and I'm just like, I can't believe the respect afforded to religion. I always remember being like 12 or 13 and I was messing around or something in the synagogue because it was somebody's bar mitzvah or I don't know what. And somebody else, maybe a couple of years older than me, like he turned around and went like, shh, hey, have some respect. The rabbi's talking. And I remember even then I was like 12 and I remember thinking like, why should I respect for the rabbi? Are you kidding me? For this guy? Like, what are you talking nonsense? So, yeah, I just think it's just a belief. It makes people feel better, doesn't it? It's all part of the same thing. And I even went to the woman who's my mum's friend. I went to her, again, I must have been 11 or 12, and I had a bad back. I had like broken a small bone in my back. And I went and she did Reiki. Have you heard of that?
Yes. The massage practice.
I felt great after, but I mean, she didn't even touch me. It was like she touches near me and the energy does something or other. And it's just, I felt great after because I believed it enough at the time. It wouldn't work now. So it's just belief, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, the respect for belief is pretty strong here in the United States. It's so it's like there must be a huge culture shock for people who live in pretty secular Western European countries like, Denmark or Belgium, Germany or England, and then taking a trip downtown to the United States and just seeing how there's still this debate about whether or not we're still a Christian nation. This is actually a good way to shift the conversation into the another direction of a topic of conversation that you've been also interested in recently, is this rise, this shift in cultural attitudes that we're having when it comes to like the sort of woke culture that we're dealing with. So this is mainly an American phenomenon, was my understanding of it, but it's starting to also pestilentially spread into other countries as well. And so what made you, interested in tackling woke culture? You've interviewed Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay, the architects of the grievance studies hoax. So what interested in you into this? Well, it's a pretty sharp turn from talking about exorcisms and pedophiles into woke culture.
Yeah, I mean, so then I try with the podcast as well to do a bit of both, which I suppose, there's a lot of podcasts just on like woke stuff, so I don't know how much like new stuff I can add to that. But I try to do the podcast on like that, and then I'll have like a crazy, weird, somebody who was like a psychopath or that kind of thing on the next week, and so but yeah, it's really interesting because there does seem to be this problem with like the police and stuff in America, and there's a huge thing going on. I think I'm right in saying that like in the last, somebody will correct me on this, but I think there's something like 3 or 2 black people per year in the UK are killed by police compared to like 12 white people, something like that. So when the George Floyd stuff happened in the States, it became a huge thing on Instagram as well. Sorry, in the UK. And yeah, it was just like but this isn't what's happening. And then everybody kept sharing stuff everywhere that was like, oh, you think it's not a UK problem? It is. This is why. And it's like, come on. And I, again, being a journalist, I don't want to simply dismiss that. The thing is, I'm white. I might be Jewish, but I enjoy sort of, I guess, a word that I hate, but white privilege. I'm a man. I'm from a middle class background. Everything. I've had a nice life. It's in my interest, and I've obviously been talking a lot about belief and why people believe things. I'm aware that it's in my interest to believe that all this woke stuff is bullshit, because it basically, if it's true, it undermines everything that I've ever done. It suggests that, oh, you got your documentary on the BBC, but it was easy for you because you're white and male. So I might have a cognitive bias that makes me less likely to believe those kinds of things because it suits me. Equally, it suits other people for different reasons. If people from certain minorities, it will suit them to believe the opposite, because they say, oh, why didn't I get a documentary on the BBC? Because I'm this minority or that minority. Equally, I mean, yeah. So I really try to be like open and fair about it and think, okay, where's the truth here? And obviously I do have some privileges from being white and middle class and male. I mean, that's just obvious. That's as clear as day to me. But I looked up, there was statistics that were put out recently in the UK about like on-screen, actors and presenters and stuff. And it found that we have a word, BAME. Yeah, everybody's used, it's like even by the people, Black, Asian. See, okay, now I look like I'm anti-Asian for not remembering. Black, and when we say Asian in the UK, it usually means sort of Indian or Bangladeshi or something, that typically, because we have a very, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. And basically, so 13% of the UK workforce is BAME, and 23% of TV talent are BAME. So they are the most overrepresented by a long distance. And I've had the last 7 years, I think we're shaped by our experiences. I mean, all of us are to some extent. Our political beliefs, everything, it's all shaped by our own experiences. And it's that's why we have such different views and different. So I was never that into this whole thing until it affected me. And for 7 years or so, I kept going to production meetings and talking to commissioners and things, TV. And time after time after time, I would discuss an idea, let's go and film these people and those people. And they would say, oh, we love the idea. Like, oh, you've really put it together well. Do you think we would be able to use another presenter instead of you, another journalist? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, we'd like to be able to use a minority in your place. So for the first year or two of that, I was quite young and I just thought, I'll make it some way. I always said no to that though, because I just thought it's my idea. I'm going to present it. But yeah, the first few years, I felt a little bit like I was sacrificing myself. I felt great, I felt like, oh, what a great guy I am. I'm sacrificing myself for the greater cause. I'm helping to redress societal imbalance, which in a sense is true. I think what's frustrating is we're all inherently selfish beings, and I'm a little bit selfish. And I don't know if you guys do it. Do you do that thing where if I leave a tip in a jar in a cafe, I want them to see that I've done it? Do you know what I mean? I sort of drop it extra hard.
Yeah. You wait until if they turn around, you wait until they turn back around so they can see you.
I'm pissed off if I leave it and it's like another noise happened at the same time, so they didn't hear and they're like looking away. I'm like, oh, that was a waste. I want to sort of take it out and put it back in again, like louder. And that's just me being honest. I obviously don't really do that, but like, you want to be acknowledged if you're doing something. I wanted it to be. It was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to have the career I want to have or be as successful as I wanted to be. But at least people are going like, oh, that's good of you for, and that's a selfish desire of my own, but that's what I wanted. And what was actually happening was I would come home from those meetings and feeling shit, because it feels shit when you've just, put months of work into an idea and you've been told like for months as well, oh, it seems like this editor really likes it. They like the idea. They're going to go through with it and it's going to be a big deal. It's going to go on, BBC or Nat Geo or whatever. And then you're sitting there and they're just going like, yeah, it's got to be someone who's not white and male though. That's a shit feeling. And I would come home and just go on Twitter and just see everywhere people saying like, oh, when are they going to finally let, minorities be presenters on TV and stuff like that? And that's when it hurt. It was actually painful, because it was like saying, well, it's so easy for you. You're white and male and you're still not getting that job. You must not be very good at what you do. So, and more often than not, I would click on those profiles of the people saying this. It would often be people from certain minorities saying like, when are we going to get a chance? And I'd click on their profile and they've just won like an Emmy. You know, these are like hugely successful people, and I can't even get a documentary made. And it felt a little bit disingenuous to me. It felt a bit like, And then you've also got a lot of white middle class people who are posting the same stuff. Like, hey, we got to make the TV industry less white. We got to do all these things. And I always felt like, great, you should quit. If that's how you feel, quit and give your job to somebody who's from a minority then. Because it's very easy to put your neck out. It's not really putting your neck out when you say like something that's obviously going to get you applause on Twitter, which is saying we need to diversify and stuff. It would be, I would applaud them if they said that and then quit their own job. Okay, because also it's the producers who are more white. So if there is a problem, those are the people that need to be stepping down, giving their jobs to people. Instead, they're just sort of, you know, it's just the face of the channel, the TV presenter who has to be a minority or whatever. So those kinds of things that started to, I've been going on for ages, but it frustrate me. That's what got me into feeling that way, you know?
Andrew, we were talking about certain documentaries being made at the beginning of this podcast, and as a journalist with the encroaching woke culture, one of the biggest concerns about it, though, it's made the discussion of nuance for just a variety of very, very difficult issues almost impossible to discuss. Anything that even tangentially touches upon race, ethnicity, or whatever, when we discuss something that's controversial because it touches upon race, that has to be discussed, it's now almost impossible because it just insinuates bigotry. That's just caused a wave in cancel culture just all around. But we still need to be able to think, to be able to observe ideas, read literature, anything that makes us uncomfortable in order to get people to think about the messages they hold. Now I can imagine as a journalist and as a filmmaker, this has to have made your job more difficult. How has it affected you in a way other than what you've described here? Has it shelved certain projects you've had? Have you been forbidden to go into certain areas?
So after I made the Exorcist film, I wanted to sort of, you know, when you're on a run, you feel like you're you know, because the stuff I'd done before the Exorcist was like, they went out on big channels in the end. I think they went out on HBO, these like short videos, but the Exorcist was like an hour long or whatever film. It went to festival. It was like a big deal. And I was like, I'm going to capitalize on that and like, you know, not stop working. I work like crazy. I'm a lot of people do, you know, but I was sleeping like a couple hours a night because I was just like, okay, I've got to make the next one now. And the next one I wanted to do was abortion. So because I found out about this woman who they call in Argentina the crazy baby lady. She's like anti-legal abortion. And she's completely nuts and like screaming. Do you guys know the Westboro Baptist Church?
Yes.
Right.
So you know was it Shirley, the matriarch of the family?
Yes.
She was like that. She was like, you know, screaming at people on the streets, and you can imagine the crazy baby lady. That's what she was like. So I went and filmed I just put on Facebook like, hey, who wants to come and film this? And I found a team, and we just went and filmed her for weeks and weeks, and it was amazing. It was better than The Exorcist. That's what I thought anyway, because she led us into her home, her family. We hung around with her for months, and like I started to, again, being very moderate, I started to like her a lot and just think, actually, she's very nice, and she's like giving me food at her house and taking me on the school run to get her kids, and she could be a grandma of mine or an aunt or something. She just has these views that I find incredibly dangerous, and so I just really enjoyed doing that. And then I started sending it around, and I thought I'd have more chance with this one because the Exorcist film had already come out to great acclaim and stuff, so I thought this is going to be an easy one to get sold. And just, you know, producer after producer after producer was just like, but you're a man and it's about abortion. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I'm not making any judgments about it. I'm just the presenter, and I'm like, you know, and I try that. I really push that in the film. I even say at one point in a voiceover, like, you know, being a man, I don't want to push my opinion too hard. I'm just taking people into the world of these people and letting them decide. So that screwed that up, which was very frustrating. And then after that, meeting after meeting where I would get told by producers like I said, like, you're white and male, you can't, you know, we can't have you doing stuff. And then I started saying, and I almost hate myself for saying it, but I started saying, you know, I'm Jewish. And being Jewish in England is a bit different to America because there's so few Jews outside of America. I mean, most Jewish people are in America and Israel. And then it's something like 0.1% of the British population is Jewish. And, you know, some of them are impoverished, some are not. And, you know, it's a big mix. But there is anti-Semitism. You probably don't feel as protected as one might in New York or something, or LA or something. But I went with it and I just said, like, well, you know, I'm Jewish. That's a minority, isn't it? And they were like, well, if you want to come back with stories about Judaism, as I think I was saying earlier, then by all means do. And I was sort of pushed into this corner of like, I've got to look at like the one thing I grew up with that I don't want to look at, that doesn't interest me. That's what I'm being pushed into. It feels racist to me. They're trying not to be racist, and in doing so, I feel like it is racist. They're telling a guy, imagine telling someone that, yeah, you can be on screen as long as you talk about your own stuff. And that doesn't seem like a very, as a journalist, you want to be an adventurer. You want to go out and like be expansive and interesting and see where worlds collide and where worlds meet. And at the moment, I feel like, the direction we're going in is very much like everybody to themselves.
Yeah, that's the nefarious game of identity politics that is being played, where you are not allowed to talk about a topic unless you have personal experience with it or it's a part of your identity. And ignoring like the entire there's a lot of contradictions that come with this, right? There's some mental games and thought experiments that people play this, where, you know, there's clear double standards in this theory. But on the topic of like race, I think that's the most nuclear one, especially here in the United States, given what's been occurring these past couple of months. But the idea is that, well, if the end goal 100 years down the line is to be that the least interesting thing about you is the color of your skin, that is the one thing that nobody cares about in the slightest, nobody thinks twice, then the best way to go about it is the colorblind route. Like, you don't make it a big deal. What you don't do is instill quotas. And so that's the argument for quotas, right? It's like, well, you know, there's clear underrepresentation, and the only reasoning behind this is because of racism, and the way to alleviate this disparity is to have quotas. And so, you know, it's like, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to ultimately have a society 100 years down the line where race doesn't matter, and so we act colorblind? Or is it the other way around, where we recognize that race matters because a lot of prejudice and a lot of racism that occurs, and the only way that you can recognize how powerful those two forces are is by recognizing your race? It's like, well, yeah, the sort of anti-racist route to go by like Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo. It's like, race matters whether you like it or not, and we have to focus on it, like so much so to the point where we ignore a huge chunk of what Martin Luther King fought for. And that's an affair, you know, it sometimes I often joke about it. It's like, sometimes I'm very happy that I am not white, because my views would immediately have me canceled and ostracized by my community, I guess. And so, what do you think would be the strongest arguments in favor of this game of identity politics that is being played when someone says you shouldn't be talking about abortion because this is not a topic that affects you, and, you know, because it doesn't affect you, you are incapable of being objective about it, or at the very least, you know, sympathetic about it towards women? What do you think is the strongest argument to be made there?
I think it can go wrong so a lot of the guys I interviewed in the abortion film, I was going around and interviewing, and I was conscious of this as well, which the problem is that most of the Senate in Argentina are old white men. And so I think, like, and this is something like I'm sure you'd agree with as well. I mean, nothing's ever black and white. It's never that clear. There are some arguments on that side. They want to pass legal abortion because, you know, it's women that are suffering. It's women that are, you know, young women who are raped and whatever, and they're having to go through 9 months of hell and then have a horrible life. And it's old white men who can't relate to that who are passing those laws. And then you get a type of male feminist who I never really trust. There's these kind of guys who were like going along to the marches where I would be trying to talk to the women because it is their experience after all. So I do get that. You know, I'm not going to go and look, you know, in UFO hunters or whatever and then go and interview like, I don't know, somebody who doesn't believe in UFOs. I want to talk to the actual person at the heart of the story, which for abortion, I guess, is women. It does affect the man as well, but it's complicated. And I would talk to these women in groups, and the men with them, who were these like right-on left-wing activists who very woke and all of that, would jump in and just not stop talking. And I'd be like, okay, thank you. Can I talk to them? Because I'm not going to show them. That's going to make it, So there is a type of like male feminist, this idea that like we're approaching a feminist topic. Women have been suppressed for however long. And we're going to sort it out by having a documentary that is you're being led by a man. I get it. I do get that. At the same time, I don't think we have to be that strong. If it was a case of they're making this film anyway, the BBC are making this film, and then they have to decide who presents it. If they chose a man, I think that would be maybe a stupid decision. It would be depriving a woman of a job, and it would be going against the whole suffragette movement, the whole feminist movement. As it happened, I made the documentary from scratch with some friends. It was already made. If you like the documentary, show it. I don't know. That was the problem with it. I think the issue we've got at the moment, I think maybe, is that people who are a bit further left think quite communally and sort of group think. People who are quite a bit further right think a bit more individually. Doesn't mean that they're selfish. It just means that they see people more as individuals. So I think this is the issue we're having. It's like people will say to me all the time, people who don't agree with me, when I say like, I can't get a job at the moment because I'm white, they'll say, well, you've benefited for 1,000 years, because they think communally. They're thinking about my group. As it happens, my group would have been in the ghettos and gulags of Russia being like murdered and starved to death, but white people for however long. So that's how they think. And we can't get past that. It's not how I think. I think as an individual who's got their own experience, but those people, we're not going to align, That's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, is that there's a kernel of truth in what they're saying, in the sense that someone who is personally affected by a particular topic, they probably do have further insight into that topic. As you said, like when we're talking about women who are directly affected by abortion, we should be sympathetic to what they're saying, and we should recognize that, while at the same time not ignoring the fact that the expectation is for us to be objective about the situation. So there's no reason why a man such as yourself can't be objective about the state of abortion. And the same thing goes to race relations. So that's not to say that we shouldn't be listening more intently, more deeply to people of color, because they're the ones who are being directly affected by race. And that's also not to say that we should be ignoring the fact that white people genuinely do have privilege, that they have benefited from that. But as you said, when you think about it collectively, communally, and strictly in those terms, you're going to ignore the fact that this doesn't affect everyone in the same way. There's a lot of variance to the way privilege works. There's variance to the way oppression works, and you have to recognize that. But when you fail to think sufficiently individualistically, that's going to be completely wiped out. And so, it's a matter of just recognizing the nuances in those conversations that are just being failed to have on both sides as well, right? There's also this mentality of just pull yourselves up by the bootstraps and you'll be perfectly fine, right? There's no problems in the United States. Like it's not that simple, right? So that's the problem that we're dealing with. And so
I had an issue recently, right? Just a friend of mine who's American, she messaged after one of my podcasts, and she said or one of my videos I'd put up, and she was like, why don't you have a series? And, on TV, why haven't you got your own show? And I said, I just told her the truth. I said, unfortunately, I'm being told over and over and over again, because I'm white and male and all of that stuff. And she instantly was like, that sounds racist to me. And I was like, who? And she was like, she was implying that I was being racist by saying that. And I said, but I'm just telling you what they said. I didn't even give her an opinion about it. I just told her what I said. And she said, the fact that I'm even thinking about it and feeling sorry for myself, she was like, Andrew, there's a genocide happening in America right now. There is a Holocaust happening. And I was like, but that was, for me, it was amazing, because I was trying to stay calm and everything, because also, as you guys know, anything you say back once somebody starts on you that way, there's you become more of a monster in their eyes. So I was just like, oh. And I was shocked. You don't want to be called racist. You kept saying I was racist. So I was just like, oh, okay. But I really tried to analyze it afterwards, and I thought, why is that? Why does she think that way? And again, it comes down to the group thing. She's unable to empathize with a close friend of hers who's been working like crazy for years and isn't able to get a job because of his skin color. It doesn't mean she can't also feel sorry for people who are victims of police brutality and stuff in America. She could do both things. To me, it felt like a total lack of empathy, which leads me to another point. It drives me mad that the right and sometimes sort of centrist anti-woke people refer to the left as, or the woke people as snowflakes. I think that is the worst marketing thing that we could be doing, because that is exactly what they want. It's basically a war of empathy. The idea is like, which of us has the most empathy? And they're going around telling everyone it's them. Well, it's not.
Well, it's disingenuous on both ends as well, because when Trump during his re-election campaign has been on record saying that if you burn the American flag, you get locked up. You get locked up for a year. So the right, in as much as they challenge the left, as they challenge the left on the issue that they're not for free speech, well, neither are they. So it's hypocritical on both grounds.
I would say that neither of them are snowflakes. They're both, in my mind, they're both bullies, the right and the left.
Yeah.
Not snowflakes. They're hardened, angry people, as the flag burning you're saying suggests.
But going back to the idea of communities, though, about like speaking in terms of having compassion for groups, I mean, like that I find itself, again, like everything else, there's a kernel of truth to that. But when you really dive down and take a look at it, it's not that simple, because I mean, the fact of the matter is, groups aren't necessarily groups out of themselves. I mean, like Asians don't mean Asians. Like you're Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and what about Asians born in America as part to the mainland, or even when you use the phrase Black community, what do you mean? Like Black immigrants from Africa, people who've been here in the States for the time. What about the sociological complexes and all the details that go into that? So you have to have empathy for a group, sure, but like on those grounds, when someone disqualified you, Andrew, for being a white male, well, that's true on the surface, but as you said, you come from a Jewish background, from where Jews have been persecuted for hundreds of years, and that this whole woke thing just oversimplifies the narrative.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, but it's a willingness, I suppose, to find a simple way to put everyone into groups. I don't know. I have theories, and a lot of them are just nonsense. But I guess look, you guys are anti-woke, and you're probably then therefore a bit more individualistic in terms of, like, I guess at school or high school or whatever, you didn't want to think of yourself as part of the group. I don't know. And some people did. And I sometimes feel like they're sort of coming back to get us. There were like people in the high school or whatever years ago who were just a bit maybe boring. Maybe they didn't have anything interesting to say about the world. And then 10 years later, they get to come out on Instagram and say all this stuff, this woke stuff, and it makes them very popular. I just think I feel like more of an individual. I don't know. I guess you guys must be too. I can actually think about what's happening.
Right. Yeah, and I'll say, like, from a utilitarian perspective, I would make the argument that if it were the case that I thought that thinking collectively increased the well-being of society, and it actually ended up, even though it might not be the best framework, it at the end of the day just ultimately did increase the well-being, and it made race relations better, I'd be on board. But I mean, I've been looking at studies that show, like, things like diversity training, for instance, actually makes people more antagonistic towards minorities because of this complex that it creates, right? This complex of hierarchies. And
well,
so
I'm
it's
pissed off.
and
I wouldn't be.
Right?
I wouldn't be. I was like, and a lot of people start sort of more lefty and all of that stuff, more woke or politically correct, as it was called back when I was at university, and they move a little bit further away from that as they get older. And it's really frustrating. You want to throttle these people and just like say to them, there must be a reason that as people get older, they move away from these views. And when you're young, I remember, because I was politically correct, and to an extent, politically correct is quite nice. It just means being polite and treating everybody nicely, But I was quite on board with some of that stuff when I was younger. And when people said to me like, yeah, but older people, they've had more experience and all of that, I think my mind used to think, yeah, but that's just because they're old and selfish and grouchy and stuff. And like, as I've actually gotten older myself, I don't feel more selfish. If anything, I feel like I actually have more empathy, but I don't try and lie to myself about having empathy for people I've never met before. I don't think that's that human. That's why, I mean, we have a whole thing about Syria and immigrants and stuff, and like people getting into the border in England, people crossing the English Channel to get into England, immigrants. And everybody was like so anti-immigrants. And then they saw a picture of a dead baby from like Syria or whatever who had drowned or something. It was like in the news. and everybody was then like, let them in, because you can actually see it. But I think anybody who, like I say, I think it is a war of empathy. Everybody's trying to prove that because essentially that means you're better than someone else. If you have more empathy, you're a nicer, better, good person. And I just think a lot of it's bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we coming up on hour and 10 minutes. So I want to thank you, Andrew Gold, endlessly for coming on the podcast. I'll promote all your stuff at the beginning of the podcast because, as I always say, most people click off like an hour-long video 20 minutes in. But anything that you want to promote right now, and any future projects, your current podcast, and again, I'll put all this at the beginning of the intro of the podcast as well.
I got nothing. Just the podcast at the moment. That would be great. It's growing, and it's got some similar stuff to you guys as well. So I think your audience would enjoy it.
Yeah, that's true. There's some good overlap there. He's had James Lindsay on his podcast, Helen Pluckrose on his podcast, both fantastic people to have on. He's had Count Dankula on his podcast. That was interesting. So
yeah, he's a nutter. Did you guys know of him already?
Yeah, he's interesting.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I mean, look, everybody, like friends of mine, thought they would hate him, and then they found him okay. But he's problematic.
Let's play it lightly, yeah. But we've had James on several times, and James is a wonderful guy. He's a friend of the show, and we've always enjoyed speaking to him. And he's doing important work.
Yeah. He's also a bit of a what's the word? He's like he likes an argument, doesn't he? He winds people up a bit sometimes, James.
Oh, on Twitter, yeah. I criticized him for his tactics on Twitter, but once more, thanks for coming to the podcast, man. And whenever you have a future project, we'd love to have you back on to promote it once more, or even if back on just to continue to chat.
Thanks, guys. It's been lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.